Imagine being the most powerful man in Europe, feared by kings, loved by your soldiers, and respected by millions. But then in an instant you're stripped of everything. Your empire crumbles. Your enemies unite. And you? You're banished to a tiny island, left to rot in exile. For most people this would be the end. A final chapter in a tragic downfall. But for Napoleon Bonaparte, it was only the beginning. Against all odds, against the might of Europe, this one man did the impossible. He returned. And in just 100 days he shook the world once more. How did Napoleon escape his exile? How did he rebuild an army overnight? And why did his comeback change history forever? This is the legendary story of Napoleon's exile and return. A story of resilience, ambition, and a leader who refused to give up. Stay with me because by the end you'll see why Napoleon's comeback is still talked about 200 years later. Napoleon Bonaparte, once the ruler of nearly all of Europe, stood at the peak of power in the early 19th century. His military genius had led the French armies to countless victories, and his ambition had reshaped the map of Europe. But as with all great leaders, enemies surrounded him. The coalition forces of Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia had grown tired of his conquests, and by 1814, they united to bring his reign to an end. After years of war, Napoleon's once mighty empire crumbled. France, exhausted and drained, could no longer support his endless campaigns. In March 1814, Paris fell to the enemy, and Napoleon was forced to abdicate the throne. The Allies, unwilling to execute him but eager to remove him from power, exiled him to the small island of Elba in the Mediterranean. Napoleon was only 45 years old when he was sent to Elba. It was a far cry from the grand palaces of France. The island was small, with few resources, and he was given the title Emperor of Elba, a humiliating shadow of his former rule. He had been stripped of everything, his army, his empire, and the adoration of his people. Yet, deep inside, Napoleon was still the man who had once conquered Europe. While in exile, Napoleon did not surrender to despair. Many men would have accepted defeat, content to live out their days in comfort. But Napoleon was no ordinary man. He still saw himself as the rightful ruler of France. He spent his time in Elba reorganizing the small local government, improving roads, and even training a tiny army of about 1,000 men. Meanwhile, back in France, discontent was brewing. The new king, Louis XVIII, had been placed on the throne by the victorious Allies, but he was unpopular. The people of France, particularly the soldiers who had once fought under Napoleon, missed their former leader. They longed for the days of glory, when France had been a dominant force in Europe. Napoleon, always a keen observer of politics, saw an opportunity. He knew that many in France still supported him, and he believed he could reclaim his empire. His exile was supposed to be permanent, but in his mind, it was only temporary. The fire of ambition still burned within him. By February 1815, Napoleon had made up his mind. He would escape and return to France. It was a risky move. If he was caught, he would be executed, but Napoleon had always thrived on risk. On the night of February 26, 1815, Napoleon and his small group of loyal followers secretly boarded a ship. They managed to evade British patrols and set sail for France. The journey was perilous, but after several days at sea, they landed on the southern coast of France, near Cannes on March 1st. From there, Napoleon and his men began their legendary march toward Paris. He had no army, no allies, and no official support. All he had was his name and the loyalty of those who still believed in him. As Napoleon moved north, word of his return spread like wildfire. At first there was doubt and fear. The king declared him an outlaw and orders were given to arrest him. Troops were sent to capture him, but Napoleon was a master of persuasion. At one point, a regiment of royalist soldiers confronted him. Napoleon, dressed in his famous gray coat, stepped forward and addressed them with unwavering confidence. "Soldiers, if any of you would shoot your emperor, do so now." There was silence. No one fired. Instead, the soldiers threw down their weapons and shouted, "Vive l'empereur! Long live the emperor!" The king's army was no match for the loyalty Napoleon commanded. Town after town, regiment after regiment, Napoleon gained more support. The people welcomed him as a hero. By the time he reached Lyon, he had thousands of troops by his side. On March 20th, just 20 days after landing in France, Napoleon entered Paris. Louis XVIII had fled. Napoleon was once again the ruler of France. His return had been swift, bloodless, and nothing short of miraculous. Napoleon's return sent shockwaves across Europe. The Allied powers were stunned. They had thought they were rid of him forever, but now he was back, and ready to fight. Napoleon wasted no time. He began rebuilding his army, knowing that war was inevitable. He declared that he wanted peace, but the Allies did not trust him. They formed a new coalition and prepared to march against him. In just a few months, Napoleon raised an army of over 200,000 men. His goal was to strike first before the Allies could fully unite. He marched toward Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were gathering. This led to the fateful Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. At Waterloo, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington's British forces and Prussian reinforcements led by General Blücher. It was one of the most decisive battles in history. At first, Napoleon's army fought bravely. His tactics were brilliant, and for a moment, it seemed he might win. But the Prussian reinforcements arrived in the evening, overwhelming the French troops. Napoleon's army collapsed. By nightfall it was clear Napoleon had lost. His dream of reclaiming his empire was shattered. He retreated to Paris, knowing that his enemies would not spare him this time. After Waterloo, Napoleon was once again forced to abdicate. But this time there would be no Elba. The Allies decided to send him far away, to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Unlike Elba, there was no hope of escape. St. Helena was isolated, and Napoleon was closely guarded. He spent the last 6 years of his life there, writing his memoirs and reflecting on his legacy. Even in exile, Napoleon never truly gave up. He believed that history would remember him not as a defeated man, but as a visionary, a leader who had reshaped Europe. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte passed away at the age of 51. But his story did not end there. His legend lived on. He had risen from nothing to become an emperor, had fought against the greatest powers of his time, and had defied defeat until the very end. Napoleon's life was a testament to determination, ambition, and resilience. He faced impossible odds, yet he never surrendered to failure. Even after losing everything, he fought to reclaim his destiny. His story teaches us that true leaders never give up. They rise after every fall, face every challenge, and leave a mark on history. Napoleon Bonaparte may have lost his empire, but he won immortality through his unbreakable spirit.